In the 1950s, the United States underwent one of the greatest demographic and cultural transformations of the 20th century. People left densely populated city centers and moved to the suburbs, detached homes with their own yards and garages, which were expanding at a tremendous pace. For decades, this lifestyle was marketed as the American dream itself. City centers saw their populations decline, their tax bases collapse, and their urban infrastructure begin to crumble. By any reasonable measure, many American cities in the mid-1970s were not thriving metropolises. They were financially struggling concrete jungles. And yet, when we look at the suburbs today, we call them the pinnacle of wealth and prosperity. It's easy to see why. Suburbs are clean, spacious neighborhoods with low crime rates and free from the hustle and bustle. There are meticulously manicured lawns, 2 cars in front of every house, and massive shopping malls. It takes only a few months to build a new neighborhood, and the real estate market continues to grow every year. In quality of life rankings, the suburbs consistently rank ahead of bustling city centers. People love their single-family homes. More space, more privacy, and a seemingly higher standard of living. For the rest of the world, this has been the universally accepted model of development to emulate for decades. However, describing the suburbs as an economic success story overlooks a crucial fact: that these seemingly affluent suburbs are, in reality, massive financial black holes. Building a beautiful living space is not the same as building a financially self-sustaining, sustainable city. That's why, before we either praise the American dream or completely dismiss it, there are some important questions we need to answer. How can a city appear to be growing so wealthy while actually teetering on the brink of bankruptcy? What does a booming suburb actually mean? And does it automatically equate to economic prosperity? And finally, who is actually paying for the cost of those single-family homes we love so much? To understand how the suburbs came to be what they are today, you have to look back to the post-World War II era of the 1950s. The old city centers were overcrowded. A new order was needed, but the capital required for it wasn't available locally. Just as a country emerging from war relies on foreign aid, the suburban boom was financed by massive federal subsidies, namely highway projects and low-interest home loans. The government has made urban sprawl a matter of state policy. Of course, one can debate its environmental or long-term sociological impacts, and this is certainly a topic worth discussing. The isolation of suburbs and car dependency are constantly criticized. However, to understand the economic transformation of the suburbs, you need to realize that that initial federal funding was the foundation of it all. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the suburbs were built, much like a country receiving foreign aid, on the back of a massive influx of outside funds. Roads, schools, miles of water and sewer lines. None of it could have been built without that external support. However, subsidies cannot last forever. Local governments had to become self-sufficient. As a result, municipalities shifted to an aggressive growth model, The goal was to expand the property tax base by opening up more land for development. Local governments began to fill their budgets with participation fees collected from contractors and new zoning permits. As a result, tax revenues increased at a tremendous rate on paper. From the outside, it was an incredible growth story. As the suburban population grew rapidly, municipal coffers were overflowing with construction fees. New roads were being built, and the economy was growing steadily. However, construction alone does not create a sustainable economy. Many cities around the world have experienced construction booms. What set the suburbs apart was the enormous maintenance burden created by this system. The suburbs rebranded themselves as a hub of success and security. People were paying high taxes, but in return they were getting excellent roads and new schools. However, the math behind this apparent prosperity was flawed. Just because it's easy to build a new suburb doesn't mean it's profitable in the long run. Many suburban municipalities in the United States are now facing the reality that the new revenue flowing into the system isn't enough to sustain the existing one. Horizontal development means much more asphalt, much longer sewer pipes, and much more electrical wiring for each home. In densely populated urban areas, the cost of infrastructure that supports 100 families might support only 5 families in the suburbs. Nevertheless, municipalities believe that the benefits of this lifestyle would outweigh the costs. They hope to offset the costs by spreading commercial areas and large office parks across this expansive area. However, when you factor in the parts that resemble Singapore, namely city centers with luxury apartment buildings and bustling commercial districts, the picture changes. Dense city centers are incredibly tax efficient. The value per square kilometer and the tax revenue generated far exceed the maintenance costs. In the suburbs, however, the picture becomes more complicated. The property taxes paid by these seemingly affluent single-family homes do not cover the long-term maintenance of the highway running past their doorsteps, the water system, and garbage collection services. In other words, calling the suburbs an economic miracle is like looking at just the foundation of a building and calling it a skyscraper. The foundation, that is, the construction phase, is truly impressive. But the hard part comes after that. Maintenance. A genuine and sustainable urban economy requires density. City centers are self-sustaining thanks to the power of commerce, efficient infrastructure, and a dense population. Suburbs, on the other hand, must operate under entirely different rules because they reject this density. Reason 1: infrastructure and geography. This is where the suburban model completely breaks down. In an apartment building, you collect trash from 50 units at a single location all at once. You also drop your mail into a single mailbox. However, in the suburbs, garbage trucks, school buses, and police patrols must travel for miles. The cost of providing these services increases exponentially as population density decreases. This creates a level of inefficiency so great that no prosperity index can measure it. Then there is the social and commercial infrastructure. In densely populated cities, commerce is supported by millions of people within walking distance. This fosters the growth of local businesses, creates jobs, and brings together a skilled workforce. In the suburbs, however, everything revolves around the car. Commerce is limited to large chain stores with massive parking lots. This model does not foster a local economic ecosystem. It merely creates shopping centers. And the third constraint, the revenue structure. That is, the suburban Ponzi scheme. The suburbs' main source of revenue isn't existing taxes, but hot money from new growth. When suburbs were first built, maintenance costs were zero because the infrastructure was brand new. Contractors built the roads and handed them over to the municipality. The municipality profited from the fees paid by newcomers. However, 25 to 30 years later, when those roads, pipes, and pumps needed to be replaced, that's when the math falls apart. The taxes collected aren't enough to cover those massive maintenance costs. So what do municipalities do? To avoid bankruptcy, they allow the construction of yet another new suburban neighborhood, even further out. With the money from the new neighborhood, they repair the deteriorating roads in the old one. This is, in the truest sense of the word, a growth Ponzi scheme. And the big question hanging over it all: what will happen when the initial infrastructure reaches the end of its lifespan? The apparent success of the suburbs is, in reality, nothing more than a massive debt taken from future generations. For 30 years, the American dream was financed by this debt mechanism. Today, many American cities cannot manage this transition without raising tax rates or allowing their roads to become riddled with potholes. This is because the taxes collected from apartment buildings in those dense, seemingly poor city centers are actually used to finance the deteriorating infrastructure of the wealthy suburbs. This does not mean that the suburban model is illogical, but it does mean that it poses a massive financial risk. And many cities are increasing this risk by building new highways and expanding even further outward. They are building with the hope that future growth will pay off today's debts. This is either highly disciplined long-term planning or building a runway before the planes even exist. Only time will tell the difference between the two. What the suburbs have achieved, providing millions of people with a green, spacious, and safe living environment, is certainly not something that was created out of thin air. It is an incredible feat of construction. However, densely populated cities have a geographical and mathematical advantage that amplifies every benefit. Density is the very essence of financial sustainability. If suburbs are forced to pass on the true cost of their infrastructure to their residents, that dream can very quickly turn into a luxurious nightmare. If new growth comes to a halt, the suburbs will remain what they are, the most astonishing centers of consumption in modern history. Structures that take up far more space than they deserve, are economically dependent, and cannot survive without subsidies from city centers. The suburban story is the most optimistic vision of how people can live in prosperity. However, This lifestyle exists within an economic system where mathematical realities are still overlooked. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.